Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
Welcome to a special Labor Day edition of the Noon Report on Family Life. This summer, we've explored a variety of staycation destinations, each one fairly close to home that won't break the bank. Come along as we revisit a few of those spots in New York and Pennsylvania. First, grab your hat as we head back in time to northern PA for a bit of 1920s nostalgia. Steve Green is the director of the Eliot Ness Museum in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Steve, what can guests expect when they make the trip to Coudersport, PA's Eliot Ness Museum? What will they get to explore?
They'll really get to learn what I call the main three chapters of Eliot Ness in his life. Chicago, which is what most people are familiar with, but also Cleveland, which were some of the most important years of his life. And then they can't leave the museum without understanding why there's an Eliot Ness Museum in Coudersport and what Ness did in Coudersport.
So for those people listening who may not know, who is or who was Eliot Ness and what prompted his name to gain national recognition?
Eliot Ness is actually, in my view, America's most famous lawman, and he actually gained recognition internationally during his time because he's largely credited with taking down Al Capone in Chicago during the Roaring '20s and America's greatest failed experiment called Prohibition.
Wow. And his story really showed up in the TV show that started in the 50s called The Untouchables.
Right. In fact, that's really what launched Eliot Ness's fame. And the reason that's so important to Coudersport is because the book, The Untouchables, was written in Coudersport when Ness lived in Coudersport the last 8 months of his life. The book was actually written in the hotel across the street from the Eliot Ness Museum in the Hotel Crittenden. And Desilu Studios then bought the rights to the book and produced a TV series called The Untouchables, starring Robert Stack, and that ran from 59 to 62.
Starring Robert Stack as Eliot Ness. Co-starring Richard Anderson.
And that's what made Ness famous. Wow. Ironically, it all happened after Ness died, so he never knew of the fame he achieved.
Oh, wow. Now, you've got some special events. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, we hold a festival every year here in Coudersport, an Eliot Ness Festival. We held our first one in July 2018, our second one in 2019, shortly after which we started the museum. And then we had to COVID cancel 20 and 21. So we celebrate and teach the life and times of Ness, including his times in Chicago, his time in Cleveland, where he virtually turned around the city of Cleveland to the point where it was nicknamed by the time he left the safest city in America, having started as being as dangerous as Chicago was in the 20s. And then his final days here in Coudersport, where he died, but actually achieved his fame, and the story, The Untouchables, was born and told.
Steve, you are the founder of the museum, and like you said, it started not long ago. What's the admission fee to get into the Eliot Ness Museum, and are there any special hours?
We're an admission-free nonprofit museum, and no particular hours right now. We operate by appointment, and with what virtually turns out to be private tours at the time, but we do open for certain hours during other events.
So folks will want to call ahead and make arrangements in advance?
Absolutely, yes.
What about the monthly dinners? Can you tell us a little bit about those?
We had to cancel those when the pandemic hit, but we plan to resume. What you're referring to are our Capone Soup Kitchen days. We hope to resume those by early fall when it gets a little colder. And that's a reflection of when Capone was in Chicago, and he had the notorious image he deserved of being a heinous gangster. He held soup kitchens for the poor and the unemployed to try to garner a better image. So we have a soup kitchen event monthly at the museum where our cast from the festival come dressed the part, and we serve soup served by gangsters.
Sounds like a fun time. So, Steve, where can people learn more about Coudersport, PA and the Eliot Ness Museum?
The Eliot Ness Museum website, and we have a Facebook page. We also have a Elliott Ness Festival website, and you can learn all about Coudersport in the whole region on Visit Potter Tioga's website.
Excellent. And maybe you mentioned this. Why in the world did Elliott Ness end up in Coudersport? What was his reason?
Good question. Ness came to Coudersport in 1956 on what turned out to be a failed business venture. It was a company called the Northridge Development Corporation, a watermarking business that had a proprietary formula for watermarking documents to prevent forgery. He also intended to retire here, but the company was failing, and after about 8 months, he was trying to recover the losses of his investors, went home one day, and by the way, his first office was upstairs of this museum, and he went home to his house across the street, across the block, the courthouse square, not feeling well, was drawing a glass of water from his kitchen sink, and dropped dead of a heart attack, dropped dead. And he was only 54. And it was only 8 months after he had come to Coudersport. But it was during those 8 months that he was interviewed by a guy named Oscar Fraley in the Hotel Crittenden, across the street from the museum. Ness told Fraley about his exploits with Capone in Chicago. And it was Fraley who authored the book, The Untouchables. So the most consequential point about Coudersport is that the story of The Untouchables was born and written in Coudersport.
That's Steve Green, director of the Elliott Ness Museum in Coudersport, PA. Next, we head north to central New York for a visit to the Safe Haven Refugee Museum on the edge of Lake Ontario. Paul Lear fills us in on the unique role the Old Fort's administration building played during World War II.
Fort Ontario was the only emergency refugee shelter for victims of the Nazi Holocaust in the United States in World War II. Very unique. Almost 1,000 refugees were brought here to get them out of Allied-occupied Italy. The shelter was intended to induce our allies to convince them that the United States is serious about the rescue and the relief of Jews.
Today we have refugees coming to the U.S. from Ukraine and Afghanistan. So how long were the Jewish refugees here, and did they get help from the community members or the government to stay alive?
The refugees, for the most part, were here for 18 and a half months. Some left early. Some of the Yugoslavs went back to Yugoslavia early in the summer of 1945. They were here for 18 and a half months for the most part. Our government set up the shelter, but did the absolute bare minimum to maintain it. Refugees were supposed to work the shelter and staff it, and they relied on community groups, especially Jewish groups and others, like the National Refugee Service, to help subsist them, to give them all the greater amenities of life. They would do basic health care, basic emergency dental care, but it was up to the community and other groups from around the country to help the refugees.
So the shelter at the time was actually large enough to house all of those folks?
Yes, the shelter was actually an Army camp. It was a special unit training post in World War II. It was built for about 2,000 men. There were about 1,000 refugees here, so they had plenty of room for everyone. And they lived in the typical Army two-story dormitory buildings, 1.5-story kitchen mess rooms, and some of the older brick Army post buildings from the early 20th century. There was plenty of room for everyone. They're spread out over about 75 to 80 acres on the military reservation.
Okay, so it's a sprawling facility. I'm guessing that visitors can see an area that was set up kind of like their housing situation. What else can they see?
In the museum, they can see a lot of artifacts and stories and a lot of great photographs on individual refugees.
So many of them went home to Yugoslavia and Italy. Do we know anything about their descendants? Or maybe you want to share a story about one of those refugees?
Well, sure. While some of the refugees went back, the majority were allowed to stay in the United States. Over 200 had families in the United States already, and in the high 20s had relatives, sons in the United States military. So they had a real group here that was ready for them when they arrived. But after the war, the National Refugee Service and the Jewish organizations got together, and they found homes for them, sponsor families, for those who didn't have relatives. They went all over the United States. Of course, the families, many of them still stay in touch with the museum, and we've had refugee reunions and anniversaries, and they attend all these events. The last big one was in 2019. The refugees of Fort Ontario, pretty special. A lot of people don't realize that the shelter was the first group of refugees allowed into the United States outside the quota system. So it's considered the birthplace of American refugee policy.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think probably many of us have wondered, where did these policies start from? Do you think it's a place where families can come, including younger kids, and they can learn about this part of our nation's history?
It's a vital place where school groups are always coming to the museum. Fort Ontario, in the shelter, is the only actual Holocaust in the United States. If you go to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, there's an entire gallery dedicated to the refugee shelter. And in fact, the iconic exhibit in the museum in Washington is a section of the barbed wire fence that stood at Fort Ontario. The fence is iconic because it's where the Holocaust came to America, where everyday Americans first met the victims of Nazi persecution and learned their personal stories, and they became advocates for these refugees.
Yeah, it made it all real to those in the U.S. who just heard about it on the news. What are the admission fees, and where can we learn more about visiting the Safe Haven Holocaust Refugee Museum?
The admission fees are $5 for adults and $3 for seniors and students. There's a website on the safehavenmuseum.com. You can also visit Fort Ontario State Historic Site. There's also Facebook.
That's Paul Lear guiding us through an important part of World War II and human history. Thanks for coming along as we wind our way through the listening area. I'm Tracy Lynn with Family Life News. Today we're recapping a few of the staycation destinations we were able to visit this summer. Next up on our journey is the Steel City. We head to Pittsburgh to visit one of the Carnegie museums. Today, Connie George walks us through a few of the displays at the Carnegie Science Museum.
Our Robot Hall of Fame is a compilation of many different robots that have been made famous in history, including R2-D2 and C-3PO.
R2-D2, Your Highness.
So there's about 12 robots, all from different eras, from different classic movies.
It seems that he is carrying a message from an Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Our miniature railroad and village is the largest miniature railroad and village in the state of Pennsylvania. It has many different fun animations throughout, so over 100 animations, about 60 different models, and you'll see falling water, you'll see Forbes Field.
There it goes, deep into center field.
You'll see a play out of Punxsutawney Phil seeing his shadow. So the miniature railroad and village depicts all the different icons of the Western Pennsylvania region before 1945.
Wow, so kind of a glimpse at history as well, and it rather large, the display. How much space does that take up?
It's the size of 10 normal rooms in someone's house. And then this summer, we're celebrating the Summer of Rhythm and Sound. And we have a traveling guitar exhibition that's from the National Guitar Museum. So there's over 70 different guitars, including Lucille. And there's also the largest playable guitar in the world. It's 30 feet long. So it's a really exciting traveling exhibit that will be there through September. And we have concerts coming up.
See who can resist walking over and touching and playing that big, huge guitar.
I know, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? We're excited to have that and offer that as a part of general admission, so it's not an extra charge.
The other thing that caught my attention was the Body Works and the interactive exhibits with that.
Body Works is basically how our bodies are designed, how we think, how we sense. So there's different interactive exhibits there. You can compare your heartbeat to a cow's heartbeat. You can see what a clogged artery looks like. You can put together a skeleton through x-rays on a light board. You can monitor your own heartbeat. And there's many exciting, fun exhibits that are interactive in Bodyworks. And we also have shows. We do live demonstration theater shows, at least 2 every day, and they're also included with general admission. In addition to, we have Buell Planetarium shows happening every day, and they're really exciting shows because Buell Planetarium is a premier full-dome theater where you can actually see the night sky and travel to different parts of the universe and many solar systems without leaving your seat. And it's all renovated. We have a new dome, very, very comfortable seats, and it's just an exciting time. We also just hired an astronomy expert from Santa Ana, California, and he's there to manage the Buell Planetarium, and he has lots of great ideas for things to come this summer and beyond.
Thank you so much for that. What can visitors expect for parking and admission rates? Parking
is really inexpensive. It's only $5, and admission is $20 for adults and $14 for children.
I'm guessing the parking is per vehicle, right?
It is per vehicle, and it's right outside our door. We always have ample parking.
I saw that you have some tips for that on the website of how to take care of that. I'm also familiar with nearby Point State Park and Duquesne Incline. What else might folks visit that's close by?
You could go to the National Aviary. That's the National Aviary, which is very amazing. There's also an art gallery called Mattress Factory. It's not just art on walls. It's art all around you. It's very immersive. And, of course, there's the Children's Museum and Randyland, covered with outdoor artwork and sculptures. And it's very colorful and fun to walk through, and it's free. One thing that's really, really popular with tourists, it's the Andy Warhol Museum, which is also on the north side. That features all of Andy Warhol's art. And on the North Shore, you can walk along the trail. The Science Center's right on the river, the Ohio River, and it overlooks Point State Park. So you can walk along the river trail. There's water steps that you can jump in the water if you like. And there's also boating. You can rent kayaks, and you can catch a pirate game while you're here, too.
So much to do. Connie, where can we learn more about the Carnegie Science Center?
You can log on to carnegiesciencecenter.org. There's programs for children, programs for adults, programs for everyone.
That's Connie George with the Carnegie Science Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now we traverse land and trek beyond Buffalo to Lockport so we can take to the waters of the Erie Canal. Mike Rona with Lockport Locks and Erie Canal Cruises is our next guide.
Lockport is one of the great canal cities of the Erie Canal. It is noted for the incredible engineering feat that took place to get the canal installed. There is an elevation of about 70 feet that the canal had to overcome to get to the ridge where water could flow in from the Niagara River. And then between it and the Niagara River was an additional 45-foot limestone mound that had to be excavated to allow the canal to go through. It became a major transportation hub for all of Western New York when the canal was completed.
And when was that?
It started in 1817, was completed in 1825. And it's interesting that most of the canal was completed up to Lockport from Albany, and they had to wait almost 2.5 years for the Lockport Deep Cut, the limestone escarpment, to be excavated.
For listeners who may not know, what is a lock exactly?
A lock is like a gravity escalator. In this case, the boat flows into what is essentially a rectangular bathtub. The bathtub fills with water by gravity up to the next set of locks. The doors open and the boat passes through, and again, by gravity, with the flow of water, it is moved up till it reaches the elevation of the lock.
Yeah, and how many locks are there in Lockport?
2 modern locks in Lockport. Originally, there were 10, so the locks that are replaced were 90 feet long. These are 300 feet long and contain 3.5 million gallons of water.
Wow. You know, during the pandemic, I was watching a video series called Cruising the Cut. It's about a guy who has a narrowboat in England and he tours around. I learned so much about the canal system, but the Erie Canal system is a little bit different. I think it's a little wider.
Yes, it's considerably wider.
So can you tell me about the town? Obviously, it probably wasn't called Lockport before the locks were installed. And how has it built up because of the locks?
Well, before the canal was constructed, there was nothing here. There was a small village of Buffalo, about 20 miles southwest of us, that had maybe 1,300 people in 1810, but it's essentially wilderness. Its name was called the Niagara Frontier because it was the frontier of the United States. The towns that popped up on the canal because of the canal.
Yeah. Was coal one of the primary things that were shipped along the route?
No, coal was found south of us in Pennsylvania, in the Pittsburgh area, along the Appalachian Mountains up to the Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area. Here it was salt, sandstone, granite, timber, agricultural goods were all shipped to the East Coast. And manufactured products came from the East Coast to the inland.
So people can come here and take an Erie Canal cruise. What does that include?
Well, the cruise is about an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours long. In the cruise, you will go through Lock 34 and 35. Then when you get up to the upper level of the lock, you will pass inside what is called the Lockport Deep Cut. The Deep Cut was a 45-foot-high mound of limestone that was excavated to install the canal. You'll see the marks where the engineers, actually they were called engineers, but we had no engineers in the United States. They were learning to be engineers, to where they broke up the rocks either using War of 1812, the leftover gunpowder, or just simple hammers, chisels, and sledgehammers. The canal towpath. As you come out of that area, we will return. You're heading west at this point. We will then turn around and come back down through the locks again, and we'll pass through what is called the historic Market Street district. Those are the homes that were some of the first homes built in Lockport, with early construction starting in the 1830s. Most of the homes were constructed out of the limestone that was excavated out of the canal. They were called freestone buildings, and that's what helped cause the city to boom. You had plenty of building materials that were free. Also, you'll see what is called a levee. There is a 60-mile-long, probably 30-foot wide rock and dirt berm, which holds the Erie Canal up against the Niagara Escarpment. The city of Lockport at that point dips below the canal. So it'd be like going to New Orleans and the Mississippi River, to where if you're standing in downtown New Orleans, you see the ships going by up above you. It's the same way here. The people in lower Lockport will see the boats traveling by above their heads. It's fully narrated. All our captains have been with the business for more than 10 years. They're knowledgeable. They're open to questions.
So, Mike, how much should folks expect to pay when booking a boat tour with Lockport Locks?
For adults at age 11 and up, it's $21.50. Youth from age 4 to 10 is $11. Children under 4 are free. And if you're a member of the Automobile Association or the Canadian Automobile Association, the adult charge is $20.
Okay.
We would recommend, to make sure you don't make a trip to us and then find out we're sold out, is that you purchase your ticket ahead of time. You go online and you can make a purchase ahead of time.
Great. And what's that website?
That's lockportlocks.com.
It's spelled just the way it sounds.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us maybe about the town itself?
Yes. We have a fantastic Episcopal church that has Tiffany stained glass windows in it. We have a very informative Discovery Center, which will tell you the history of Lockport. You can walk down to see the old 19th century canal locks, which are in the process of being restored. There is a rebuild of an 1840s canal boat down there that you can see. There is a tour which will take you to the underground caves to see the old raceways of the canal. It is an interesting little town. It's about 18,000 people, and it's very scenic.
That's Mike Rona with Lockport Locks and Erie Canal Cruises, helping us on our way around Lockport, New York, and the Erie Canal. I'm Tracy Lynn with Family Life. Today, we're spotlighting a few of our 2022 staycation destinations. We started by paying tribute to lawman Eliot Ness, who settled in Coudersport, Pennsylvania before his death. Next, we're taking you to the hometown of a man who grew up in the Keystone State and achieved honor in the military and recognition around the world for his films. Jane McKirkin with the Jimmy Stewart Museum in Indiana, Pennsylvania, fills us in on Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart was an incredible actor in his time. He made over 80 films. And most people know him from It's a Wonderful Life, which a lot of people watch every holiday season, which is a classic film.
Get me back to my wife and kids! Help me, Clarence, please.
But he's got some other great films, like he did 4 Alfred Hitchcock movies like Rear Window, a movie Harvey that a lot of people know. He also did a lot of original movies, like the original You've Got Mail with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. He made the movie The Shop Around the Corner.
I didn't know you cared for high literature.
There are many things you don't know about me, Mr. Crowley.
Did a lot of westerns, actually did a cartoon, Fievel Heads West. So he has a really wide variety of movies, but he was also a really good man. He was a World War II hero, flew 20 dangerous combat missions, and was one of the most highly decorated celebrities to ever fight for his country. So there's a lot of fascinating backdrop to this man, more than just being an actor.
Yeah, I love that there's this wonderful character as well as the celebrity aspect.
Absolutely.
You already mentioned that the museum is a great place for movie buffs. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the movies he's been a part of?
We have a lot of stuff in the museum. We have a whole Indiana gallery, which is all about his childhood and his upbringing and him going to Princeton and his dad's hardware store, which has some great stories about his Oscar being in the front window that he won for Philadelphia story. We've got a whole gallery about his World War II service. We've got the Chasen's booth he used to sit with as his family in California. It was part of a restaurant, and the only two that are on display is the Stewart booth and Ronald Reagan's booth in the Reagan Presidential Library. We've got his California office, his boyhood bedroom with his bed. Right now, we have rotating exhibits. Of course, at Christmas, we have a huge It's a Wonderful Life display, but right now we're lucky enough to have a Grace Kelly exhibit because he starred with her in Rear Window.
A murderer would never parade his crime in front of an open window.
Why not?
So there is costumes and outfits and all sorts of memorabilia from her childhood, and then when she was Princess Grace of Monaco. And then we've got a theater, 50-seat theater, that we can show biographies and matinees.
I was ready to tell you that a certain man in my state, a Mr. James Taylor, wanted to put through this dam for his own profit.
And then all the way around the 50-seat theater is all about his movies and his awards, his acting awards at the end of that.
Janie, tell us a little bit about the It's a Wonderful Life special event.
Absolutely. Our biggest event is the weekend before Thanksgiving, where we have our It's a Wonderful Life Festival. And that's when we have our huge parade on Friday night. Our whole street is also lined up with holiday lights. We have a 34-foot Christmas tree in the middle of town. At the museum, we show the documentary, The Making of It's a Wonderful Life, a GE Theater, A Trail to Christmas with Jimmy Stewart, Ronald Reagan. And then we show It's a Wonderful Life all weekend, along with our whole display about the movie and behind-the-scenes facts. We have 10 to 12 Christmas trees that are all decorated per different Jimmy Stewart movies or his life. So the museum is really, really magical at the holidays. And our town is really a vibrant town. It's very much like Bedford Falls. Got a lot of great boutiques and stores and restaurants and craft breweries. So it's a really great place to come and stay. And there'll be other activities going on the rest of the weekend where you can make an It's a Wonderful Life candle or pottery or go have Christmas tea with George Bailey, a Jimmy Stewart impersonator. There's other special dinners and events going on that we're in the process of planning. But it's going to be a great weekend. And then the rest through the holidays, everything that's at the museum continues through the end of the year. And we show the movie, have the display, and then other stores and downtown will be running specials and things like that.
Excellent. So much fun. Where can folks listening learn more no matter what time of the year? Where can they go to get caught up on the latest happenings?
Absolutely. You can either follow us on Facebook or Instagram at the Jimmy Stewart Museum official page, or you could go out to our website at www.jimmy.org, and that has his biography, all the movies he made, what matinees are showing, what special events or special exhibits are showing. So we always have the latest update there, and we have an online store. So if you can't make it in person, we've got all sorts of great ideas for Christmas presents, ornaments, books, shirts, DVDs, what have you. Our website is a great place to go, as well as following us on social media.
Great. And one more question, Jamie. What does it cost to come check everything out here at the museum?
Sure. Our admission is $10. It's $9 for seniors or military. It's $8 for kids up to 17. I think 3 and younger, 4 and younger free. And that includes your entry into the museum. And also, if you watch a biography or if you stay for the matinee, that's all included in your price of admission.
Great. And how long do you think people should allow to kind of take it all in?
We have a lot of texts, a lot of stories, a lot of background stuff. So if you're a big reader, it could be 2 to 2.5 hours, or if you stay for the movie, it could be longer. If you're breezing through the museum, it could be as little as an hour. But we have a lot of memorabilia that Jimmy Stewart personally picked out and donated to the museum, and there's a lot to see. And people are always surprised at how much we have and thought, I wish I would have delegated some more time to see the museum.
That's Jane McKirkin, Executive Director at the Jimmy Stewart Museum in Indiana, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about any of these destinations, you can find a list at familylife.org/podcasts. May you and your loved ones enjoy the time together on this Labor Day holiday. Thanks for coming along on this special Family Life Labor Day edition of the Noon Report.